Okay, welcome back. We're, of course, talking about Trump tariffs. Tonight is the moment of truth when we will know what President Trump wants to do as far as tariffs are concerned. And tomorrow morning, of course, we'll be reacting to it. I just thought before we dive into our next discussion, put two data points on board. One is, what is the impact on India? I mean, of course, it depends on the tariffs which are imposed. Now, JP Morgan economists say that the difference between the tariffs which India imposes on the US and US imposes on India on a weighted average basis is about 8%. So, I mean, if the increase were to be just that, 8%, the impact would be about 20 basis point hit on GDP. If JP Morgan economists say the Trump administration decides to include VAT of 18%, you're essentially looking at an impact of 50 basis points as far as GDP is concerned. So, I mean, this is data points as we are looking at it. And of course, this does not include what India is already offering. As Parikshit has been telling us, and our Delhi reporting team has been telling us, there have been hectic parleys and proposals, and maybe more firmer kind of proposal is being readied. Maybe it's been discussed with Trump administration, and Trump, of course, is on record, and they've said that some of this stuff is indeed happening, and they will be sort of taking note of it. So we don't know the reaction function, and of course what Trump is going to make of it, and then sort of will that mean a carve out in some sense for India, etc. So without knowing all of that, I mean, this essentially are the numbers. This is this particular table is sector-wise exports to the US, ranked by the contribution to the GDP. Exports to India's exports to US percentage GDP. This is tariffs imposed by US and India, and this is tariffs imposed by India on the US. So the way to do this is basically you take this number, subtract that number. That is essentially the difference, which if they're going to be purely reciprocal, and if they go sector-wise, I mean, you get a sense of where the hit is likely to come. And here, and taking into account contribution to GDP, there are three sectors which are in focus. One is pharma, the other one is textiles and clothing, and the last one is agri and meat products. I mean, here the difference is the largest, and the contribution is not very small. I mean, it's still small, but as relative to some of the other sectors, these are the three areas, these are the three sectors where perhaps the impact looks higher, perhaps they are more vulnerable as well. So let's, with this short kind of sort of setup or a preamble, let me welcome in Anup Wadhawan, former Commerce Secretary, and Abhijit Das, international trade expert and former head Center for WTO Studies. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate your time here on CNBC-TV18. Mr. Wadhawan, if I can start with you, sir. You must have seen news reports about proposals being readied here in India to lower tariffs. What can we here in India in terms, offer? I think the deficit is about to the tune of about a little over $40 billion as of the last financial year. What can India offer to offset, to preempt some of these tariffs, which are going to be announced later today? Go on.
I think, that is not very consistent with our intention to have a bilateral trade agreement negotiation in good faith. So there is a view that, that might be kept in mind by the US. We had a very successful visit by Mr. Brendan Leach recently. And so there is some conjecture, perhaps with significant basis, that the US might realize that, these reciprocal tariffs and the acrimony associated with them and the tensions associated with them are not consistent with the good faith, bilateral trade negotiation. So it is still conjecture as to what will happen, and as to what India can give will all be part of the negotiation. And typically trade agreements are balanced. You give mutual concessions which are commensurate with each other and balance the trade agreement. So certainly, areas of US interest, they have some interests in things like, motorcycles and...
Wadhawan, if I can come in. Sorry, you're saying the lowering tariffs now will not be consistent with trying to strike a bilateral trade deal. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. All that has to be negotiated as a matter of give and take in the trade deal. Trade deals involve give and take. You take
No,
American
Mr. Wadhawan,
emissions.
but the point is, so you're saying take the reciprocal tariffs as they come, that's more consistent, and then negotiate a deal separately. That's the way to do it.
What I'm saying is that reciprocal tariffs should not come if better sense prevails as it should. Reciprocal tariffs should not come. Quick trade negotiation should happen, and you should reach an early harvest agreement on goods of interest, which both countries have in their wish list. So that is what I'm saying.
So it's possible, Mr. Wadhawan, you're saying that if better sense prevails, I mean, now who knows, but it's possible later today when we hear about countries where this will be imposed, you're saying it's possible the Trump administration say since discussions with India are in advanced stages and they're happy about what they're seeing, we're going to hold off in terms of tariffs on India. It's possible.
It is entirely possible in my view. Let's see what happens. If reciprocal duties are imposed, we have to see what the levels are, what the goods are on which they are imposed, and then we'll have to take stock of that and suitably react to it. So that becomes a separate channel away from that trade negotiation. That has to be dealt with separately, and let's see what happens.
All right, fair enough. I mean, I think that gives a fair sense. Now, let's welcome in Abhijit Das as well. Mr. Das, good to have you on the program. What is your sense? You heard Mr. Wadhawan.
Dr. Wadhawan has given one side of the picture. No doubt that there is a possibility that India might be spared of the reciprocal tariffs. But to my mind, that possibility is rather low. If we look at President Trump's statements over the past 3-4 days, it doesn't give me much ground for optimism that India will be spared of the reciprocal tariffs. If India does have to confront reciprocal tariffs, then this clearly, to my mind, would be something like a breach of good faith, since India and US are already engaged in the bilateral trade agreement negotiations. It would be prudent for US not to impose the reciprocal tariffs. But as all of us know at this juncture, prudence doesn't seem to be the order of the day. So to my mind, the possibility is fairly high that India will be at the receiving end of reciprocal tariffs. What will be the extent? What will be the sectors? I'm sure we'll have to just wait for a few hours, and then we'll get to know where we stand on reciprocal tariffs. But as Dr. Wadhawan said, if we are confronted with reciprocal tariffs, then while the BTA negotiations continue, we must not hesitate in trying to protect our national interests. And one way to do it would be to impose some tariffs from our side as a signal mainly. Otherwise, if we don't do it, then in the bilateral trade agreement negotiations, much of our negotiating capital will be spent in getting rid of the reciprocal tariffs, whereas in the BTA negotiations, our endeavor should instead be to see if we can secure new and additional market access in the US in sectors like textiles and clothing and leather.
Gentlemen, I also want to draw your attention to the remark that Mr. Trump made overnight. He said that, and I quote, "I heard that India is going to be dropping its tariffs substantially." So I don't know. I mean, the fine point or the finer points will only be revealed once those trade negotiations are done. Because tonight we'll only get the US number. And what is India willing to relent on, that we have to see. But some signs are already there. For instance, bourbon whiskey, cars, all that is already up in the air. So Mr. Das, if you could come in on this, which could be some of the product lines, tariff lines, where if we cut a little bit, it will not hurt our trade interests too much? Which could be those segments?
In the industrial goods sector, there is not too much that US can export to us. So one could be fairly selective, fairly targeted, and India could cut tariffs. But as Dr. Wadhawan said earlier, the tariff cuts should not be unilateral. These should be accompanied with the United States extending tariff concessions on products of our interest. Otherwise, what will happen is if we keep on giving unilateral concessions, which we seem to have done so far, we will not get anything in return. US will only pocket those concessions. Bear in mind that these are negotiations, and in negotiations, it's a matter of give and take.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure that concessions which we have already made and which we might make in the near future, these are accompanied with reciprocal concessions from the US side.
Sure. So let me actually ask, Mr. Wadhawan, exactly that. So the common sense logic that one is hearing all around is that, let's say, pharma imports into the US are really important for the US as well. I mean, getting drugs at reasonable pricing. So maybe that could be one bargaining chip, that they don't hike tariffs, import tariffs on incoming pharma products too much. And similarly, the same question I asked Mr. Das, where could India cut a little bit to appease the US, maybe to an extent, without hurting our own trade interests?
As Dr. Das said, America is not a major manufacturing nation, so industrial goods are not a major aspect of their exports. Of course, they have interests in motorcycles, two-wheelers, four-wheelers. They have some limited interests. So we could possibly accommodate some of the interests with various safeguards. Typically in trade negotiations, you have various measures like staging of duties. The duties don't kick in immediately. You can have a tariff rate quota where the concessional tariff is on some limited quantities so that your domestic industry does not get, hurt. Similarly, the other area is agriculture. So it's not a question of what we are willing to give. That what we are willing to give has to match with what they want. So we have to consider what they want, and typically they will want concessions on, two-wheelers, four-wheelers, agri products, dairy products. So we have to then see which are the things we can do comfortably, which are the things we can do with some sort of, safeguard measures, maybe a tariff quota where there's a limit on the quantities that come in. So it's very technical, and we've done it before. We've done, trade agreements with more, significant industrial nations than the US, say Japan, Korea, ASEAN. So there is a method in this, and I'm sure we can, accommodate American requests while protecting our sensitivities and adopting various measures that can, prevent our industry from being hurt beyond an acceptable degree, let me say.
Let's see, gentlemen, very, very interesting times, whether our negotiators, and more power to all of them, people within the Commerce Ministry, whether they can walk this fine line between giving America a bit of what it wants while protecting, of course, our own Indian industrial interests as well, industrial as well as agricultural interests, of course. Thank you very much for joining in. Of course, this is an ongoing story, and live coverage will be starting a little past midnight tonight, and we will continue it well into the morning tomorrow. So, long hours coming up. But